Committee will reconvene. Gentlelady have an amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 6 to House Resolution 918, offered by Ms. Scanlon. At the end of the resolution, the following. Section 7, limitation on subpoena authority. Notwithstanding Clause 2M of Rule 11, a chair or ranking minority member of a committee or select committee of the House of Representatives, if such chair or ranking minority member did not comply with a subpoena duly issued by the House of Representatives, a committee of the House of Representatives, or a select committee of the House of Representatives, is not authorized to issue a subpoena, 1, pursuant to this resolution, or 2, in furtherance of the impeachment inquiry described in the first section of this resolution.
The gentlelady is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you. My amendment would make clear that members of this body who have defied a congressional subpoena are not entitled to enforce a subpoena for the purposes of this inquiry. This should be common sense. Troublingly, we have Republican members of this body who have thumbed their noses at congressional subpoenas. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, one of the 3 committees directed to carry out this baseless investigation, was issued a subpoena last year by the bipartisan January 6th Select Committee to testify concerning what he knew about the planning and execution of the various attempts to overturn the 2020 election, the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and the former president's response and activities in response to that attack on the Capitol. But he willfully defied that subpoena and failed to appear for his scheduled depositions multiple times. Now, out of compliance with Congress himself, he's being asked to wield subpoena power as an act of petty political vengeance. These are not credible actors. This is not a credible investigation. It's a farce. It's a kangaroo court, all to satisfy the 4 times indicted, twice impeached, and unelected former president's ego. And as we've seen for years, our extreme Republican colleagues are more than happy to cave to Trump's demands of retribution against his political rivals in a desperate attempt to help him in the polls. So refusing to cooperate with a congressional subpoena, especially as a member of this body, a body where we've heard argument today about the duty to enforce Article 1 authority, is just another example of our extremist colleagues' disregard for the rule of law and our American institutions. So we as members of Congress shouldn't let it stand, and I would urge adoption of my amendment.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I'd request a vote.
Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mrs. Fishbach. Mr. Massey. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
And the no. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see the gentleman come in. How's the gentleman from Colorado recorded?
The gentleman is not recorded. Mr. Neguse, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 6 nays.
And the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment number 7.
Gentleman's recognized. Oh, excuse me. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 7 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. McGovern. Strike Section 6.
Gentleman's recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This impeachment inquiry resolution deems as passed a second resolution regarding the enforcement of subpoenas in court, including potentially dragging 2 nonpartisan career prosecutors to court when their supervisor already participated in a transcribed interview. And my amendment doesn't even stop you from doing that. All I'm saying is that rather than deeming this resolution, let's consider it separately on the floor and let the House decide. Let's just recap for those just tuning in what happened right before this committee went into recess. Democrats brought up an amendment to insert words "open and transparent" into the Republicans' impeachment resolution. You all voted no. Democrats brought up an amendment to require at least one public hearing on impeachment. My friends voted no. I asked when the transcripts of their behind-closed-doors interviews would be released. They told us they'd have to get back to us. And I think what's going on here is pretty clear. They're against transparency because this whole exercise is built on Republicans going on Fox News and mischaracterizing, let's be honest, lying about the evidence. They interview someone in private who says President Biden did nothing wrong. Then they go on Fox News and literally say the opposite. I'll give you an example. My friend from Texas, Mr. Roy, keeps harping on the need to bring in 2 career prosecutors, who I'm not going to reference by name because they're getting death threats. But what he doesn't tell you is that Republicans already dragged in their boss to testify before the Judiciary Committee on October 25th. And his testimony totally undercuts and debunks all of the absurd claims that my colleague from Texas keeps making. Now, I'm told that Mr. Roy wasn't at that interview. I don't know why he didn't show up, but maybe if he showed up, he would know that his allegations have been repeatedly disproven. But that's just one example of why Republicans don't want transparency. That's why they don't want public hearings. They know that unless they do this behind closed doors, this whole extreme political stunt will evaporate because their lies will be exposed. And so they voted no on transparency and openness and no on open hearings. I think at the very least, Republicans should be more transparent and require a separate vote on a resolution authorizing our committees to go to court. And with that, I would urge a yes vote on my amendment, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'm not really going to address that amendment, but my Democratic colleagues have tried to argue that the committees have experienced historic levels of cooperation from the White House and from the administration, and clearly they've been taking their talking points directly from the White House. The committees have had to use all the tools in their toolbox to get compliance, and still the White House is refusing to provide documents and witnesses in the furtherance of this investigation. Let's start with the suspicious activities reports. In the past, when Congress requested SARs, the Treasury Department provided them. But in a policy change, the Biden administration has refused. Only when the Oversight Committee noticed a hearing to discuss this obstruction did the Treasury Department provide them, but only in camera. Let's look at the bank records. Chairman Comer has had to subpoena the banks for those records. Let's talk about FBI's FD 1023 form. This was a document that the FBI created based on information provided by a trusted, confidential informant. The document details a bribery scheme involving Joe and Hunter Biden. When the Oversight Committee subpoenaed this document, the FBI initially wouldn't even acknowledge that the document existed. It took to the eve of a contempt markup of FBI Director Wray to gain access to this document. Again and again, the committees have had to fight to obtain records, information, and testimony to which they are entitled. In another example, the Oversight Committee has been requesting for months all the pseudonym emails when Joe Biden was vice president. He even used his pseudonym to communicate with Hunter Biden's associates. There are at least 80,000 pages of emails that we know of. The Biden White House only produced 14 pages until the committee noticed this markup for the impeachment inquiry resolution. Even the White House has stated in writing that it does not plan to cooperate with this impeachment inquiry absent a vote. The House of Representatives needs this impeachment inquiry resolution to move forward in this investigation, to understand why President Biden continues to lie about his involvement with his family's business schemes. He has lied about knowing his son's business dealings, the source of his son's funds, about having contact with his son's business associates, benefiting from his son's businesses, his son doing anything wrong. Why does the president continue to lie? How deep was his role in his son's business schemes? And these schemes involve foreign oligarchs and CCP officials. They involve getting millions of dollars in exchange for no known good or service. They involved over 20 shell companies. We have evidence of direct payments to Joe Biden from his brother James and from Hunter. Hunter even paid Joe directly from the business account, an account that received millions from the CCP. If they were just loan repayments, where are the loan documents? The committees have asked for those loan documents. They've received nothing. And even if they were loan repayments, Joe Biden was still getting money from the CCP. Did he know it was from the CCP? These are why we need to do this investigation and this inquiry. These are the questions that still need to be answered, and why this impeachment inquiry resolution is absolutely needed. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Yeah, Mr.
Gentleman's
Chairman,
recognized.
Yeah. Boy, it's just really amazing to hear some of the stuff that gets set up here. The bottom line is everything the gentleman said has been disproven and debunked. I mean, there's no there. There's not even any smoke. And that's why earlier I read a list. I only read like the first 10 names of Republican members, many who are on the committees of jurisdiction who have basically said there's no there. But be that as it may, I mean, we are here because Donald Trump wants us to be here. We are here because this is a convenient distraction for my Republican friends for the fact that they have accomplished absolutely nothing, not a thing for the American people since they took control of this House. We are here because they're trying to finish the job they couldn't get done on January 6th, and that is they want to overturn the last election. That is why we are here. It is as clear as day. And so, you know, all these documents that the gentleman refers to that, by the way, it seems that these committees are getting, again, you know, why can't we at least why can't we demand that the committees who get it file a report? Why can't we demand that they at least do one public hearing? Why can't we demand, you know, any transparency or any openness? So this is, you know, those are bad talking points, let me just say. So whoever put them together, I think, you know, did my friend a disservice. But again, this is not a radical amendment. It's just, to me, common sense. And again, I hope all my colleagues will vote yes. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chair, yes.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you so very much. And I think that this, once again, proves the fact that we need, what we just heard, demonstrates that we need public hearings so that the public can listen to the witnesses. They can see how they are asked questions, what the answers are, so it's very clear. Because we have evidence from the record, because they're of these like 90,000-page documents that have been produced that show that this loan that my colleague was referred to happened back in 2017, before President Biden had even announced his run for presidency. So it has nothing to do with what the president has done while serving in office these last 3 years, which is an incredible job, the most significant legislative achievement since the New Deal, in contrast to what we've done here, which is absolutely nothing. And the records show, the bank records show, that yes, there was a loan and it was repaid, and that when it was repaid, there was precisely annotation saying this is for the repayment of a loan, period, in 2017 and 2018. This is the kind of information that's already significantly sort of in the record. We've gone over and over again with it. And I need to say that multiple independent fact checkers, including the Washington Examiner, which we know the Washington Examiner is not a left-leaning organization, that they have fact-checked that and proven otherwise than the allegations we are hearing. And so with that, I yield back, Mr.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Yeah, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle keep referring to, quote, extraordinary cooperation with the Justice Department, and then just raise questions about who was at a particular interview or not. I think that particular questioning was just Chairman Jordan, given whatever was going on that day. I think it was a circumstance in which he was the only one that was available on the time. But in any event, we're privy to what was discussed, and the fact is the Justice Department has been essentially unilaterally limiting the scope of what the department witnesses can testify about. That's been happening over and over and over again. When you look at the transcripts and when you look at the conversations, you know what's happening. When the witnesses come in and they're being told, hey, on this set of questions, answer, this is an ongoing investigation. That's what's actually happening. And that's, frankly, an ongoing problem that we're having to deal with, and one of the reasons that's behind the need for an inquiry is to be able to go seek the truth where it actually may lead. And if there's no there there, then I feel like my colleagues protest a little much, given what we now know in terms of the amount of money that has been flowing into the Biden family, which is concerning on its face. The extent to which we now have an indictment of the president's son, concerning on its face. The extent to which we have witness testimony that has come in before under oath, talking about the extent to which the president himself was present and privy to the information involving Hunter. This is concerning on its face. The fact is, right now we have curtailment of investigative steps to protect the Bidens. Why prosecutors prohibited investigators from referencing, to dad and the big guy in witness interviews. Anytime any questioning goes down that line, the DOJ has been telling people, nope, stop. You say this is nothing but ongoing investigations. The fact that we had 84,000, whatever the number is, of all of the email correspondence with the pseudonyms, and we've gotten 14 of them, on its face, this body deserves to get more information. I think this is very clear. The average American watching this would agree. I'm perfectly happy to stand behind this. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah, I just want to say, $2 billion from the Saudi government to Jared Kushner, and not a word. Oh, that's just normal. I mean, come on, give me a break. Again, a little transparency, I think, would be welcome here. And quite frankly, this notion that we should trust the chairs of these respective committees to tell us all that they know, when we know that they've been misrepresenting publicly what has been said privately. We'd like to see the transcripts. We'd like a little openness. That's all. The American people deserve that. The way this resolution is written, when it's all said and done with, no matter what happens, the American people may get nothing, may not get any report at the end of this process. So again, but $2 billion from the Saudi government, come on, and no questions. That's just perfectly normal. Give me a break. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
As for recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
Recorded vote's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mr. Massey. Mr. Norman. No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I have another amendment, amendment number 8.
Gentleman's recognized. Oh, the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 8 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. McGovern. Page 14, line 18, strike House Resolution 917 and insert House Resolution 917 as amended by the amendment specified in Section 7 of this resolution. Add at the end the following. Section 7, Amendment to House Resolution 917. The amendment to House Resolution 917 referred to in Section 6 of this resolution is as follows. Page 4, line 12, insert before the semicolon the following. Except with respect to a grand jury matter related to a criminal prosecution pending on the date of adoption of this resolution, a grand jury matter related to a prosecution arising from the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021, or a grand jury matter in a case with respect to which former President Donald Trump is a defendant.
Gentleman is recognized to discuss his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, from the beginning of this Congress, extreme MAGA Republicans have made it clear that they're willing to abuse the important constitutional power of impeachment for their own political goals. Chief among those goals, whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. The extreme MAGA architects of this impeachment have sought to intervene, disrupt, and undermine the numerous ongoing criminal prosecutions of Donald Trump himself, along with his misguided followers who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. The extreme MAGA architects of this impeachment have made statements and written letters harassing the Georgia and New York prosecutors pursuing justice against Donald Trump in their states. The extreme MAGA architects of this impeachment have vowed to defund the special counsel Jack Smith's office just for doing his job of pursuing justice without fear or favor. Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who recently claimed credit for goading former Speaker Kevin McCarthy into launching this inquiry, and other extreme MAGA Republicans routinely refer to the criminals imprisoned for committing crimes on January 6th as hostages and patriots, and promise retribution against the DOJ for their prosecutions. This resolution clears a path for these same extreme MAGA Trump protectors to seek and obtain law enforcement sensitive grand jury secret information at the heart of ongoing criminal prosecutions. Despite months of investigation, extreme MAGA Republicans cannot define any alleged high crimes or misdemeanors as the basis for this inquiry. It is not surprising, then, that this resolution contains no limit on the scope of the inquiry, and as a result, there is nothing here to constrain a motivated committee chair from demanding, accessing, and spoiling critical information at the heart of ongoing criminal prosecutions of Donald Trump or January 6th defendants. I hope my Republican colleagues can agree that any legitimate inquiry concerning the conduct of the current president should have absolutely nothing to do with the pending cases against Donald Trump or the other individual criminals responsible for the insurrection against the Capitol on January 6th. If so, I expect that they will join me in voting for this amendment to protect the integrity of those ongoing prosecutions and prevent inappropriate interference. If they reject this amendment, it will be because they know this impeachment inquiry is more about protecting Donald Trump from justice and accountability than anything else. And I would urge a unanimous vote on my amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
As for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mr. Massey.
No.
Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse.
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I have an amendment to this.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 9 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. Neguse. Before the resolve clause, insert the following. Whereas by December 11th, in the first session, the 117th Congress had enacted 71 bills. The 116th Congress, under divided government, had enacted 78 bills, and the 118th Congress had enacted just 22 bills. And whereas, as of December 6, 2023, the House of Representatives has spent 26 days electing 2 speakers of the House. Now, therefore, be it.
Gentleman's recognized on this amendment.
I thank the chairman. This amendment is very simple, very straightforward, and it essentially recounts the inadequacies of this legislative session of Congress under Republican control for the better part of the last 12 months. The American people understand that the impeachment that Republicans have decided to pursue is a waste of time and is distorted from the priorities that they would like to see us as elected leaders address. They want to see us working on lowering costs, on growing the middle class, on building safer communities, on finding common ground. And it's unfortunate that as they look at the full spectrum of the last 11 months under Republican control, they will find nothing of the sort. The data speaks for itself. This will go down as the least productive Congress since 1933. Think about that. The least productive Congress since the Great Depression. That is what Republicans have brought the country in the form of their majority. And by the way, you go back almost 100 years, 90 years, plenty of those years, Republicans had a majority, Democrats had a majority. Sometimes it was divided government, sometimes one party had a majority in every branch. But none of those years ultimately included a Congress as unproductive as this one. We have 48 hours left in terms of legislative work. Republicans obviously set the schedule, they set the calendar, they have informed the House and the country that the legislative week will end Thursday. Everyone will go home for holiday break. The year will end. No permanent farm bill reauthorization. No permanent FAA reauthorization. No action on critical national security considerations that the president has implored us as a Congress to take up. No action on funding government. When we return back in January, or in January, I should say, we'll face another set of dueling deadlines that Republicans have imposed to try to find a way to fund the government after two efforts in just the last 4 months by some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to shut the government down. It is hard for me, and I think awfully hard for the American people, to identify a single thing of substance that the Republican majority has accomplished in these last 11 months, beyond expelling one of their own members, and of course, ejecting their former speaker. And with all of that backdrop in mind, House Republicans have decided that the most important priority for the United States Congress to pursue before they go home for vacation is to start a baseless impeachment inquiry against the President of the United States. I think that's a sad state of affairs. I don't think it's reflective of the view of most Americans who, as I said, would just like to see all of us finding ways to find common ground and address the challenges of our time that are very pressing. It's deeply unfortunate. I think my colleagues know that, but they are committed to pursuing this course all the same. And so my hope is that we can at least provide some factual context for the House to consider with respect to the whereas clauses that we're adding, so that every member can be fully apprised as to the nature of this Congress. And with that,
Would the gentleman yield?
oh, sure, happy to yield.
I had a mentor who admonished me once to never confuse activity with progress. And I'm not sure that all of these bills constitute progress. I probably voted against most of them, given my penchant for voting no. How many of these were post office renamings?
Yeah, well, I'd say a couple of things, Mr. Massey. And I have no doubt, given your penchant for voting no, that you would disapprove and disagree with the work of much of the prior Congresses, Republican and Democrat. I'm not accusing you, of course, in a pejorative sense. What I would say is that even under your constrained view of government, the statistics are sobering. I think it's tough to argue that this Congress has been a productive one. 22 bills enacted since the start of this year. 22. I mean, by the way,
We could,
by the way, Representative Massey, I'll give you a chance, opportunity. There are plenty, I've had many conversations with some of your colleagues, Republican colleagues on your side of the aisle, who have bills that are thoughtful, addressing some of the challenges that we face, that are bipartisan in nature. They can't get them to the floor. They can't convince their leadership to allow them to come before this committee. So when I say that this is the least productive Congress in the history of, well, modern history of the country since the Great Depression, I'm not so sure that I would find much disagreement amongst some members of your own caucus, certainly not amongst the American people. Again, I understand the esoteric argument you're making with respect to, some bills being less meaningful than others. That might be an argument to make when there's at least some numerical comparison to be made. In this case, the numbers speak for themselves. This Congress isn't doing anything. Anything. Put aside the numbers. I mean, I think you'd agree with me that it's probably a good idea that we have a permanent farm bill extension, right? I mean, you don't believe that we should just forget about a permanent 5-year reauthorization for the farm bill and reauthorization for the FAA and funding the government and all these core. Of course,
Gentleman yield. Yeah, I'd like to see the Farm Bill come to the floor. There's legislation in there that I've introduced that would like to see that become law. Ms. Ledger Fernandez is a co-sponsor of some of those changes that we need. My only
let's
point.
do that instead of
Yeah.
impeachment.
My only point was, in a metric that includes the naming of post offices, and we haven't named a lot of post offices this Congress. I got to admit, we're kind of slacking on that regard. None since the new speaker hasn't even named a post office, as far as I can tell. But I just think we shouldn't confuse activity with progress. And my constituents don't care about the number of bills we pass; they care about the quality of bills.
Well, and I would say, while I have
yield
great
back.
respect for my colleague. I understand the argument he's making. I would say I think your constituents in Kentucky, as well as my constituents in Colorado, do care about the Farm Bill being reauthorized. They care about the FAA bill. They care about the funding of government. And irrespective of where one lands on the numerical comparisons, and again, I think it is evident that the reality is this Congress, that many of the bills in prior Congresses that are included in that total were in fact substantive, not just post office naming bills. But I'll take the gentleman's point and would just suggest that in the last 11 months, again, I can't point to a single accomplishment that the Republican majority has pursued. And prioritization matters, right? I mean, ultimately, the Republican leadership, Speaker, committee chairs, they decide what the House is going to consider and what it's not going to consider. And the fact that all of those important priorities that I just mentioned, which I think the American people care deeply about, can't get to the floor. And meanwhile, the last vote, or second to last vote we take before a holiday break will be the initiation of an impeachment inquiry. I think, to me, it encapsulates the entire approach that the Republican conference has taken this Congress. And that's all. I'm just suggesting to you that I think most of the folks back in Kentucky, certainly the folks back in Colorado, in Fort Collins and in Grand County and elsewhere in my district, I go home, they're asking me about lower costs, they're asking me about inflation, they're asking me about how do we support our schools, how do we support public safety, how do we build safer communities. They're not asking me about impeachment inquiries.
Would the gentleman yield just for one more
Sure.
small fine point? This includes bills that were conferenced with the Senate or also passed the Senate and signed into law?
Correct. Yes, correct.
So there is, we have passed legislation that's sitting in the Senate that hasn't passed. So while it's true that there's a Republican speaker, and we're on our second one, this Congress in the House, there's a Democrat leader in the Senate, and you have to find common ground between the two.
Well, and this is the fascinating part, Mr. Massey, because that would be a compelling argument.
Well, I
but
think
for
it
the
still is.
But for the fact that in the 116th Congress, Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House, Donald Trump was President of the United States, Mitch McConnell was the Senate Republican Majority Leader, and somehow we found a way to get 78 bills across the finish line in that Congress. Divided government notwithstanding, we found common ground, we charted a path forward. I suggest to you the problem in this instance, it's not a function of House Democrats or Senate Democrats or Senate Republicans or the White House. It is exclusively a function of the House Republican Conference that has made clear, as you said, that they do not value quantity with respect to legislation that we're pursuing, and that they don't put a premium on actually getting bills signed into law that might make a difference in the American people's lives. And that's your preference, stated preference. You're entitled to that preference, different than mine, but it has consequences.
Well, included in this statistic is the CARES Act, which has been, that was the $2 trillion that Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, and Nancy Pelosi passed.
And almost your entire conference voted for, yes.
Yes, and I was against it because I said it would
I
cause
understand.
inflation I said it would cause inflation and shortages and a lot of long-term maleffects to the economy, and here we are. So again, I would just, and I'll leave it at this, I don't think we should conflate activity with progress.
All right.
And some people, because a lot of these bills, besides naming post offices, were spending bills, some of my constituents would rather they hadn't passed.
Sure. Well, I will just simply say, and then I'm going to yield to the ranking member, that to the extent that the American people are interested in putting these accomplishments side by side, in the same span, the same period of time that Republicans have had a majority, when Democrats had a majority, we passed the CHIPS and Science Act to onshore domestic manufacturing in Kentucky, in Colorado, in Ohio, across the heartland. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, as you well know, to decrease healthcare costs. We passed a bipartisan infrastructure law that is expanding broadband deployment across both of our respective states. I understand the gentleman voted against most of those bills, all of those bills, but I would just suggest those measures reflected, they comported with what the American people would like to see us doing, which is solving problems. And this is far from it. And I'll yield to the ranking member.
No, I'm glad the gentleman mentioned the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Most of my Republican colleagues voted against it. Just in case you forget what that bill is, that's the bill that, even though you voted against, you do press conferences and ribbon cuttings every time some of that money goes to an infrastructure project in your respective districts. But the sad part about what is happening here, and the gentleman mentioned it, is that this Congress has become a place where trivial issues get debated passionately and important ones not at all. I mean, we spend weeks trying to figure out a Speaker of the House after the previous Speaker of the House was ousted. I mean, and the infighting on the Republican side was so intense that it was unclear whether we would ever get a Speaker of the House. I mean, every time someone got mentioned, they would be shot down. I do think the American people want us to figure out ways to pass legislation that will help them. The gentleman mentioned the Farm Bill. That's a bill that not only impacts our farmers and is important for our economy, but it also deals with issues of nutrition and food insecurity, which unfortunately remains a big problem in this country. They want us to come together and figure this out. You don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. But in this Congress, even when you agree on something, a small group on the far right gets to veto it. And so there are a lot of things that we could do in a bipartisan way that unfortunately never see the light of day. And we spend our time doing this kind of stuff. Let's launch an impeachment inquiry against Joe Biden. We don't really have any evidence. There's no smoke. There's nothing. But you know what? Hey, it's red meat for our base, and the fundraising emails can go out, and Donald Trump wants it. We'll just do whatever he wants, and he'll be happy. And I'm just saying that I think people are surprised and disappointed that, that this is a Congress that is not producing much. And again, I get that the gentleman votes usually against almost everything, and that's fine. But for the vast majority of people in this country, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, they want to see us function. I mean, and, you know, and we should be talking right now about how to avoid a government shutdown in January or February. To the best of my knowledge, we're not even having any preliminary conversations. But we have time for this. We don't have time to make sure we keep the lights on, but we have time for this. It is just so frustrating. And to the gentleman's point, that we are going to spend time, not only in this committee, but tomorrow on the floor debating this and not debating a supplemental package, or not figuring out how to keep the government running, or not doing anything of like that matters to anybody, but we're doing this because it matters to one person, Donald Trump. I mean, I think is really a sad commentary on where we are, I regret to say. I yield back to the gentleman.
And I yield to the gentlewoman from New Mexico.
Thank you very much. And I think that what this discussion that we're having here talks about is the difference between governing and political exercise. And what we have pointed out through the bills that we passed, the accomplishments of investing in infrastructure, investing in rural America like we have not invested in since the New Deal, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, the American Rescue Plan, or investments in rural America like we have not seen since the New Deal. And that is about governing. And that is what we're supposed to be about. We're supposed to be about not just passing the Farm Bill, which has expired and needed a safe, we're going to have to push it to next year, but we won't let it expire, but we should have worked on it. We should have gotten our legislation in there and passed. It's also we couldn't pass the agricultural appropriations bill. We couldn't pass the things that we're supposed to do about governing. And Democrats know how to govern. And that's what we showed last Congress. We governed on behalf of the people we represent. And what we have done this year is indeed political exercise. And so, my colleague from Pennsylvania, Representative Waschenschaller, says that impeachment is a political exercise. That somehow Democrats are to blame for this impeachment because we impeached President Trump. Once again, doesn't this committee remember what happened on January 6th? I suggest again that anybody who wants to vote for this impeachment inquiry ask the law enforcement officers who were battered and beaten protecting the House floor. Ask them what that impeachment was about. It wasn't a political exercise. What happened on January 6th was a violent attack on our democracy, and impeachment should not be normalized. It should not be a political exercise. It should be reserved for something like that where the evidence was overwhelming. And even if it is a political exercise, I suggest to my colleagues that the politics are not on your side. The public does not support this inquiry. According to a Morning Consult survey from earlier this month, the number of Americans who believe Congress should start these impeachment proceedings has decreased to around 40%. That's compared to Trump's January 6th impeachment trial, which had a majority of Americans supporting it. We know, we've had polls and we've looked at it, that impeachment is not a top priority of your constituents. The Congressional Integrity Project commissioned polling and asked what are the pollings. And they found that 74% of Americans, including 68% of independents, in those districts that your members represent, that Biden won, in those districts, the people, your constituents, believe that we should focus on issues like the economy, inflation, crime, over what we're doing here. 90% of voters, including 93% of independents, want Congress to stop playing partisan games and work to address these issues. 3 in 5 Americans supported the impeachment of Donald Trump for what happened. And that was after a month of evidence. because we didn't need to collect a lot of evidence because we had lived through it. You all, your committees have been collecting evidence for 11 months and leaking it out to the public, as we've described earlier. And you still cannot get the public supporting the inquiry that you are about to undertake. And I would suggest that if you are concerned that this is a political exercise, that you look and ask yourselves, what do the American people want? And they don't want this. And this is so different than the impeachment that we felt compelled to do and that Republicans supported us. Remember, you're going to proceed on this on a purely partisan effort. Republicans in the House and in the Senate voted to impeach and to convict for January 6th. And with that, I'm going to yield back to my colleague.
And I thank the gentlewoman, and I would yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I've been here since late in 2018, just over 5 years. And it has been my misfortune to be here for 2 impeachments of the President of the United States. But what is markedly different about those 2 impeachments is the amount of study we engaged in, constitutional study, rereading the Federalist Papers, debating about whether the trauma of an impeachment to the country was required by the evidence we had in front of us. The discussion was about how the evidence we had in front of us, whether the evidence of trying to extort an ally who, as we speak, is begging for us to provide aid, whether that evidence or the evidence of what happened on January 6th, both of them demanded action because we had a rogue president who was undermining our constitutional order. That's not the conversation we're having here today. The conversation we're having here today is, well, we've been through tens of thousands of pages of things, we've interviewed people, we've deposed people, we haven't found anything, so we need to crank it up a notch so we can continue to keep fishing around and looking for something. That's not an impeachment basis. And it's really, really disturbing to see the depths to which this House has sunk with this inquiry. We said at the outset, this is a waste of time. It's a political stunt. It's a MAGA kangaroo court. And I'm just really disappointed that so many of our colleagues are willing to sleepwalk through this entity and don't have the guts to stand up to it. I yield back.
I would simply say, Mr. Chairman, I share the sentiments of Ms. Scanlon and Ms. Ledger-Fernandez. I've served in Congress since 2018, have served on the Judiciary Committee throughout the duration of my tenure in the Congress. I believe I'm the only member of this committee who has served as a House prosecutor during the second impeachment trial of President Trump and spent many a day preparing for that trial and making the case to our colleagues in the upper chamber. I know a thing or two about impeachment and about the constitutional standards, the exacting nature of that standard. I was with many of you in the House chamber on the second floor on January 6th. I remember it well. I remember the outrage that so many of us felt on both sides of the aisle at what President Trump had done in inciting a mob to come and disrupt and interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. He was impeached for that on a bipartisan basis with good cause. And he has been singularly focused ever since on exacting retribution. He's made that clear. He posts about it often on social media. It's been reported that he's communicated directly to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle what he's communicated to the public, which is that he demands that House Republicans exact this political revenge and impeach President Biden. And that's why our colleagues are pursuing this step, notwithstanding the damage it'll do to the country, and notwithstanding the way in which it will divert this Congress from being able to prioritize the issues that ultimately matter to the American people. And perhaps that's the best place to close. There's a quote I'll read, because I thought it summarized this well. Quote, "While they fixate on overturning a presidential election, Americans continue to face high prices at the drugstore, roads and bridges that are falling apart, and a broken immigration system." Sorry, while House Democrats fixate on overturning a presidential election, Americans continue to face high prices at the drugstore, roads and bridges that are falling apart, and a broken immigration system. We need to end this political theater and get back to work for the American people, end quote. That's a quote from my friend, Mr. Eschenthaler, when he voted against the impeachment inquiry resolution in November, or end of October of 2019, 4 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. I would ask him to heed his own words, and perhaps maybe our colleagues to do the same. Let's get back to work on behalf of the American people. Let's work on addressing immigration and public safety, lowering costs. That's my request. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My friend from Colorado made a perfect dovetail into my comments because believe I've been misquoted twice now. Earlier in the hearing, I said explicitly that the standard of impeachment has been lowered by the Democrats to the point now where it's, in essence, a political exercise. This isn't a political exercise. We were simply going to have an inquiry, a vote on an inquiry to start the process in order to, and again, I've said it ad nauseum, the Biden administration is refusing to comply. Their own lawyers have said we need to have a vote on the inquiry, and that's what we're doing. But again, during the first impeachment of Trump, I was on the committee with my friend from Colorado and Judiciary, and I said, if we move forward with this impeachment, we are in essence making this a political exercise. And I said then, if you have a president and a House of Representative of two different political parties, it's now going to be just expected by whatever base you have, whether it's Democrat or Republican, that you're going to have an impeachment. And then I reiterated those same comments on impeachment number 2 when I sat in the same exact chair that my friend is sitting in from Colorado right now. From there, I said the same exact words. So, yeah, I spoke out against impeachment twice because I felt the standard had not been met. And I would still reiterate this, that there wasn't enough evidence to go forward. There weren't the high crimes and misdemeanors. Instead, the Democrats continue to push it forward. And now we have a situation where impeachment, the standard of impeachment has been lowered to such a degree that, again, it's merely, at this point, a political exercise. Not that this is a political exercise, but the bar has been lowered. And if you don't believe me, let's just go back and look historically. In 2017, December 6, 2017, you had H-Res 646. 58 Democrats voted to advance an article of impeachment for the high crime or misdemeanor of, wait for this one, disrespecting the NFL league anthem protest and calling a member of Congress wacky. That was a high crime and misdemeanor back in December of 2017. Then January of 2018, January 19, 2018, H-Res 705. 66 Democrats voted to advance impeachment for the high crime or misdemeanor of President Trump's, wait for it, rhetoric. You try to impeach him just for rhetoric. I mean, that is absolutely laughable. It didn't stop there. July 17, 2019, H-Res 498. 95 Democrats voted to advance impeachment for the high crime or misdemeanor of, this is another really good one, insulting the squad. I mean, it's absolutely laughable. So when I say that the Democrats have reduced the standard of impeachment to a point where it's just absolutely absurd, you have. And now we're just playing by the same rules that you set for us in the last two, in the 116th Congress. But with that, I would yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Where? Oh, I'm sorry. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to note for the record that according to this amendment, the House spent 26 days electing 2 speakers. I don't dispute we spent that much time, but we were thrown into that situation not by Republicans, but by 8 Republicans and 208 Democrats that voted to vacate the chair. So the fact that we had to spend extra time dealing with our own speaker election, we wouldn't have had to do that were it not for 208 Democrats voting with 8 Republicans to make that happen. I'd also like to note, there's been lots of talk about what we've not done. Just yesterday, we passed the Lower Cost, More Transparency Act, reducing health care costs for American families. That was a bipartisan effort that passed the House last night on suspension by wide margins. So despite us needing to do this work procedurally, we are still accomplishing things on behalf of the American people. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there any further discussion? The gentlelady from,
Yield to you, then you can yield to me.
We're just. we just
gentlelady
wanted
from
to-
New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You know, I just want to note that, Mr. Washington, I think there is a difference between what passes the House and what leadership supports. And so the instances you've described, that's not what passed the House. That is not what leadership supported, because if they had, then it would have been supported. What we're talking about is the January 6th impeachment. That is the standard for which we think you should say that is the standard. When you say we've lowered the standards, well, the standard should be something as grievous as that, something as grievous as trying to bribe a foreign government. Those are big things. Little things like that, where you get 50-some people upset about something or another, 60-some about something else, that is not what leadership is pursuing. Your leadership, as evidenced by the hearing today, as evidenced by the resolution, as evidenced by the vote that will be taken on a purely partisan basis tomorrow, is supporting impeachment inquiry where there is nothing there. And I think it's also very insulting. Well, I was struck by something I read by the chair, Chair Comer, who, as I said, he's appeared before us. I respect him. But with regards to the blinding, there's going to become like the vengeance is almost like blinding people to the need to govern, blinding them to what they're saying. Where when he was talking about impeachment, he actually described that in talking to the people who listen to CNN, who watch CNN, and need to hear about impeachment, that they were, quote, a low IQ audience. We should not lower expectations. We should not expect that Americans cannot understand the importance of what we're doing here today, the importance of what we're doing and what it means, and what the framers were talking about, which is what, our only impeachment manager on this committee talked about, how serious this action is and how serious we should take it. And with that, I yield to our ranking member.
No, I just want to, for the record, the gentlelady from Indiana, I just want to make clear, please don't blame Republican dysfunction on Democrats. It's not our fault it took 15 votes to elect your first speaker. It's not our fault that it took 2 weeks after your first speaker was ousted to find another speaker. I mean, the idea that we should vote for a Republican Speaker of the House who doesn't share our values, no, we voted for Hakeem Jeffries. We voted our values, but that it's our fault. You changed the rules to make it possible for any member on your side to oust a sitting speaker. You did that. So you changed the rules to make this dysfunction easier, and so please don't blame that on us. Thank you. I yield back.
Yield to gentleman from Colorado.
I thank the gentlewoman, and I would just simply say, I think the gentlewoman made a salient point, which is the argument that Mr. Eschenthaler was making, and the vast majority of us were not here for those votes that he referenced, but essentially motions to table impeachment resolutions that have been introduced by various different Democrats when Democrats had the minority, and essentially citing that there were various groups who voted in favor of, or rather who voted to oppose the motion to table, that is somehow equivalent to the impeachment inquiry vote that the Republican majority will insist on tomorrow. I just don't think is a good faith argument in my view. And I think where I struggle, among many of the other objections that we've made today around due process and the misplaced priorities that House Republicans are pursuing, but to the extent you want to talk about constitutional standards and high crimes and misdemeanors, it's unclear to me, I think it's unclear to the vast majority of the American people what high crime and misdemeanor you're investigating. I don't know if you have an answer in that regard. I don't. I've got tons. If you give me, I'll go through it. Please.
All right, well, first, thank you for yielding, I appreciate it. First off, I said nothing about the motion to vacate. There was another one of my colleagues. I've been simply focused on
No,
impeachment.
I'm talking about the motion to table. I wasn't referencing the motion to vacate. I'm talking
Okay, I'm
the
sorry.
votes that you
Okay.
referenced from 2017 and
Right.
2018,
Right.
which neither of you and I were here for, as you know, on resolutions that have been introduced by different members of Congress, impeachment resolutions that Democrats introduced when they were in the minority, and those resolutions were tabled. I believe the votes that you're referencing were the motion to table vote totals. And so, yes, I understand your argument, but I'm saying that's clearly not equivalent to the impeachment inquiry that you all intend to initiate tomorrow against President Biden. But anyway, to the core, I think the question I'm asking you is,
Okay, go ahead. ask
what is the specific constitutional crime that you're investigating?
Well, we're having an inquiry, so we can do an investigation and
Okay.
control the production of witnesses.
And what is the crime you're investigating?
And documents. High crimes, misdemeanors, and bribery.
What
It's in
high
the
crime and
Constitution.
misdemeanor are you investigating?
Look, I will, once I get time, I will explain what we're looking at, and I will make the equivalency
No, I'm just
of
asking you for
the last impeachment.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say, Mr. Eschenthaler, and again, I say this because I served as a prosecutor during the last impeachment of former President Trump. There was a specific high crime that he was impeached for on a bipartisan basis. 13 Republicans agreed. In 2019, when President Trump was impeached, there were two very specific offenses that he was impeached for. And I can't get an answer. I don't think members of the Oversight Committee could get an answer, or the Ways and Means Committee, or the Judiciary Committee. I don't think there is an answer. There's not, and of course it's unsurprising because according to even Fox News correspondents, House Republicans have been unable to make any kind of connection to a constitutional high crime and misdemeanor and President Biden. So I would say this, to make the argument that there is some similarity between, and I don't know if this is what you're suggesting, I hope it's not, between the various facts that you've focused and zeroed in on with respect to President Biden and President Trump's conduct on January 6th. It's very clear to me, the American people would reject that argument outright. And by the way, I will say, because Ms. Ledger-Fernandez made this argument, one of the reasons that I respect Mr. Roy, and him and I have deep disagreements, and I understand that he opposed both of the prior impeachments against President Trump. But it's an important clarification because before I quote you, I want to make sure that it's accurate. All that being said, you attested on the House floor in the days after January 6th that President Trump had engaged in impeachable conduct. That's the phrase you used, that he, quote, deserves universal condemnation for what was clearly, in my opinion, impeachable conduct. I understand you opposed, obviously, the resolution was ultimately approved for different reasons. You're not going to hear any member on our side of the aisle describing President Biden's actions in that way because there is no impeachable conduct that Republicans have identified. And so very distinct differences, a very deep contrast between the impeachment against President Trump, former President Trump, for inciting that insurrection on January 6th, and the impeachment process that you all have decided to initiate against President Biden today. And I would yield back to the gentlewoman.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Texas is
one
recognized.
thing, and I'm not going to dwell on it in the interest of time. I do want to note there is significant indication, has been referenced by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that there's no backing by the American people. AP poll, 68% of United States adults believe that President Biden is engaged in illegal or unethical but not illegal conduct. 35% say illegal, 33% say unethical but not illegal. That's all while we're going through the hearings and looking at the conduct that we see before us. So there is a significant amount, and not just Republicans, significant amount of independents, some Democrats, who believe that the president, as vice president, as private citizen, has engaged in conduct that is deserving of looking into it. To answer the gentleman's question, the question before us, I think, is whether President Biden used his office for his personal gain or his family's gain, whether there was influence peddling involved, whether there was international dollars flowing to the president as vice president or as private citizen after leaving the office of the vice presidency. And we have an obligation to follow those dollars. That's point one. Point two is whether or not the vice president then lied about said behavior, repeatedly saying, I never talked business with anybody with respect to his son's business dealings. We have ample evidence on the record indicating that there was, in fact, presence by the president when he was the vice president at business dealings of Hunter and knew full well that that kind of behavior was ongoing. Thirdly, and importantly, is whether or not there has been rampant obstruction by virtue of what we've seen out of the Department of Justice with the orders going down to say that you're going to say that this is, under investigation, that you're not going to answer those questions. What exactly happened, by the way, with Weiss cutting this sweetheart deal? Suddenly the judge says no, that's a bad deal. Suddenly then there's going to be actual real indictments that followed from that in September and then notably last week. Following those dollars, looking to see what exactly happened, I've got double pages here of all of the ways in which the Department of Justice has breached standard protocol, allowing the statute of limitations, very quite likely purposely, allowing the statute of limitations to lapse on tax problems from 2014 and 2015, very specifically, because that was most likely to be tied to the time at which Vice President Biden was involved. There are numerous things I could go down the list of, but there are lots of things the American people want to know the truth about. We're going to continue to pursue the truth, and that's what this is about. I yield back.
Would the gentleman?
Is there further discussion and debate in the amendment? Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
I'll be brief, and I'm going to yield some of my time to Guy. But, for the Americans watching this, if you interviewed in Colorado and Pennsylvania, anywhere across the country, your top 10 concerns for the main hardworking taxpayer on the street, would they say Congress hadn't passed a good number of bills? Would they say the Speaker of the House? We're really worried about that. Would they say January 6th is a top concern? I would argue, I'd wager a good bit of money they would not. What would they say? And Ms. Ledger Fernandez, you mentioned good government, good governing. Would they say having a wide open border and letting 8 to 12 million illegals that are coming to New York City and all over the country, is that good governing? Would they say having the young Americans die because of an open fentanyl trade? Would they say that's good governing? Would they say leaving Americans in Afghanistan to die, is that good governing? Would they say spending more money than we make is good governing? Would they say that buying oil from foreign countries instead of producing it here in America and the price that they're paying versus 4 years ago, is that good governing? Now, I would say those are the top concerns. And Ms. Scanlon, you mentioned, where's the guts to I guess, stop what you perceive as Republicans? Where's the guts on your side? You've got a president, Joe Biden, who's cognitively gone. Why don't you get with his handlers, whoever it is? Now, you can argue, if you think he's not cognitively gone, I would wager a good bit of money. You give him with 5 doctors, they would tell you the man's not there. Now, that's what America's concerned about. That's what America wants.
Would the
And if
gentleman
you-
yield?
Let me just finish. Those are the concerns, and I get the theater to try to divert this to the things you mentioned about the hearings and how you think. The real concerns affecting the pocketbooks of Americans, and you're going to see it. I hear it. I'm in that world of construction workers. And they're sick and tired of what this administration is doing to sell this country out. And they're going to they will let their feelings known. Now, you can disagree with that, but, and I will yield just a few minutes. I want to get to Guy, but I yield back, yield to you.
I do disagree vehemently with what you've said. Have you spent any time with Mr. Biden, with the president?
Good God,
Did you go?
no. Lord.
Good God, no. No, you've been watching a little too much Fox News.
Not Fox. Watch him on Fox, if he'll go there. Watch him on the few, how many press conferences does he have? What can he get off teleprompter and read? You tell me.
I have spent hours with the president without teleprompters, and the level of his conversation is way above this committee right now.
Mr. Scanlon, he
I
doesn't know
yield
where
back.
he is. He doesn't know where he is. He walks unless he's directionally challenged. But anyway, I get the theater and I get the wordsmithing and all that. But quite frankly, it's an embarrassment what this country is going through caused by this administration, under one man or his handlers, whoever it is. I yield to Mr. Rutherford. Guy.
I want to thank my friend from South Carolina. Look, there's been a lot of talk equating these impeachments. I'm very familiar with the last 2 impeachments. I was on judiciary during the first one. And remember, the second one didn't go through committee. It went through the Rules Committee. I sat in Mr. Negus's chair during that. So very familiar with the facts of both the impeachments. The first impeachment, just taking one at a time, was over a quid pro quo. I still think the quid pro quo didn't take place, but I do know who did have a quid pro quo, and that's Joe Biden. And you don't have to take my word for it. We have him on tape, dead to rights, bragging about shutting off aid to Ukraine in order to get a prosecutor, who's actually probably the one guy in that government that wasn't corrupt, that guy going after Burisma, which his son sat on the board of Burisma. Quite amazing. So in a sense, President Trump, the first impeachment, got impeached for something that Joe Biden actually did, and then went on TV and bragged about it. So it's quite amazing he would open the door to that. But there is and again, we're just here to decide if there should be an inquiry to proceed with investigations, and again, to compel the production of documents and the testimony of witnesses. But I'm looking at the facts here. I mean, I've got sheets and sheets of evidence here. The House Oversight Committee has uncovered that Owasco, which is Hunter Biden's shell company, that it received payments from Communist China on at least 3 occasions, made direct payments and then made direct payments to Joe Biden in 2018. The Oversight Committee has also found that Joe Biden received about $250,000 in direct payments from his family members who are making this money through their corrupt influencing peddling schemes. Like, we know he got that money, and I'm sorry, that wasn't money to repay a car. That was $250,000 that went to Joe Biden. You also have $40,000 in laundered money from Communist China. The Oversight Committee also found tens of millions of dollars from foreign adversaries funneled to the Biden family through corrupt influence peddling schemes. You have Devin Archer testifying that on approximately 20 occasions, Joe Biden called in or was part of the speakerphone conversations during Hunter Biden's business meetings. I mean, this is just what's been uncovered so far, and this is without, again, the impeachment inquiry going forward. So I am convinced that if we move forward with the impeachment inquiry, we'll be able to show that the Biden family and their business associates received roughly $24 million, if not more, from foreign sources over the course of roughly 5 years. We'll probably be able to show that President Biden was personally involved in his family's foreign business dealings and business arrangements with others, and that Biden has not been truthful about his family's foreign business entanglements. But that is just a minimum to move forward with the impeachment inquiry. So again, you can compare it to the first Trump impeachment all you want, because in a lot of ways, like I've said, you impeach Trump for what Biden actually did. But with that, I yield back to my friend from South Carolina.
Is there any further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair,
Ladies seek recognition?
Yes.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I think that what was interesting about this interchange were a couple of key things. One is that much of this conversation that we heard from Mr. Roy and Mr. Washington dealt with accusations that I entered into the record earlier about how these reports and these statements have actually shown to be contrary to the testimony and contrary to the records and documents. Like even the reporting from conservative news outlets have said these statements that we just heard from Mr. Washington and from Mr. Roy and others have actually been debunked, inconsistent with the record, directly contrary to what is in evidence. But they also point to the fact that some of these things happened in 2017 and 2018. That was before President Biden was in office. The Republicans' own witnesses have testified that in order to pursue an impeachment against a sitting president, you have to identify wrongdoing by the president during his presidency. I quote, "The relevant office for impeachment should remain the presidency, not the vice presidency of Joe Biden." That's Jonathan Turley. That is your expert saying that out, setting that out. So all of the stuff that you've talked about is not relevant to the impeachment of President Biden sitting as President Biden. And I think that that's what it is. We're hearing all these conspiracy theories that have been debunked, that the record shows is not true, and in fact, want to talk about what really happened in Ukraine, ranking member?
Yeah, no, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to constantly have to correct the record when the record is clear. The gentleman from Pennsylvania was wrong about the prosecutor in Ukraine. Vice President Biden's call for the resignation of Ukraine's corrupt prosecutor general, Viktor Shokin, the gentleman implies was somehow a secret effort to help Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company on whose board Hunter Biden served. The reality is that this was a falsehood put forward by, another, one of their star validators, Rudy Giuliani. In fact, Vice President Biden led a bipartisan international coalition calling on Ukraine to address corruption and reform the Prosecutor General's office led by Shokin. So far from helping Burisma or its owner, firing Shokin increased the likelihood that Burisma would actually be investigated. But, my friends know this. I mean, this is not new information. They know what the truth is, but it doesn't matter. And so we know where all this is going, right? This is not an inquiry. My friends have decided they're going to do this no matter what. They're just going to have to try to cobble something together to actually bring an impeachment resolution to the floor. So that's what this is. This is not about the truth. This is not about facts. It's not about investigations. It's about pushing lies and distortions that have been corrected over and over and over again. And it, again, underlies our concern as to why my friends will not agree to an amendment saying that at least there has to be one public hearing or agree to a more open and transparent process. It is clear what's going on. But come on. I mean, resuscitating and regurgitating debunked stories and conspiracy theories. I mean, I think my colleagues are better than that. I yield back.
Thank you, and I think that, Mr. Chair, if I may enter into the record an Axios article titled, "Former Giuliani Associate Urges Comer to Abandon Biden Investigation."
Without objection.
Because this article describes how, the whole Burisma conspiracy theory started with Giuliani and his associates. And even the people who were involved in that are saying, abandon it. There was nothing there. And they wrote a letter to Comer explaining how there was nothing there. And I would quote from this saying, wrote a scorching letter claiming there is simply no merit for the investigation. With all due respect, Chairman Comer, the narrative you are seeking for this investigation has been proven false many times over by a wide array of respected sources. And this is something that's in the record, but when Chairman Comer is asked about it, he says, well, I don't know anything about that, but it's in the record, it's been sent to them. And so to constantly raise this issue of Ukraine, when those who first sort of said, well, we have some dirt on the vice president are now recanting and saying, actually, there was nothing there. That's why we want the public hearings, so that this kind of information can be seen, can be televised. We want it to be televised, so the American public can judge for themselves. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the time.
Certainly. Is there any further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to insert an article into the record by Jonathan Turley, since his name was just invoked, outlining his very strong belief that there is significant evidence for this committee and this body, I should say, to pursue with respect to an impeachment inquiry, where he walks through the many reasons why that would be important
Without objection.
with respect to the president, the vice, and in his role as vice president, and to answer the question that there is subsequent obstruction activities as president that would answer the question the gentlelady put forward. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none. The questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. No. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Aye. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
And the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? Hearing no requests for further amendments, I understand that my friend, our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Government, has some closing remarks. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say that I always appreciate the tone and the civility and respect in which you conduct this committee's proceedings. You're a good man. I just wish you voted with me more. But on this occasion, I have to note that I'm deeply disappointed that we are going to advance this shameful impeachment inquiry, which is only going to further divide this country. The things that my Republican colleagues say about President Biden are unhinged, untethered to reality, let alone substantiated by the evidence. Maybe these are the alternative facts that they always talk about. But it's been said already, but it bears repeating. This Republican majority is abusing and weaponizing the impeachment process to go after President Biden with not a shred of evidence that he did anything wrong. In fact, they're doing so despite a mountain of evidence that President Biden has always followed the law. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to speak directly to the people of America. You need to know that Republicans here in Washington still refuse to accept that Joe Biden won. They refuse to accept that in a free and fair election, President Biden got 7 million more votes and won the Electoral College. Now, they might be cute about it. They say things like, Joe Biden is president, but they will not admit he won fair and square. Or maybe they don't care because they have contempt for you, the voters. They tried to stop the certification of the results to prevent Joe Biden from becoming president. Many of them still cheer on the insurrectionists. Many Republicans supported what the violent mob was trying to do. They wanted Trump to stay in power. The people's votes be damned. You know, I was one of the last people off the House floor on January 6, 2021. I took over for Speaker Pelosi after she was evacuated. I saw them pounding at the door in the Speaker's lobby, trying to get at us, trying to kill us. Trump sent them here to this building to reverse the election results and certify that he won even though he lost. And now the MAGA extremists who have control of this place want to finish the job. They still want to overturn the election. And what they couldn't accomplish on January 6th, they want to do with this extreme political stunt. They will do whatever it takes to win, and if we lose our democracy in the process, so be it. When it comes right down to it, this absurd impeachment inquiry has nothing to do with the integrity of President Biden, not a thing. And it has everything to do with the lack of integrity in the Republican Party, which has been taken over by MAGA extremists. And no amount of evidence could convince them that Joe Biden did nothing wrong, because they aren't looking for the truth. They're looking for revenge. Their partisan impeachment stunt has no credibility, no legitimacy, and no integrity. And no vote could possibly make this baseless fishing expedition legitimate. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I understand my friend from Pennsylvania also has some closing remarks he would like to make. Gentleman's
I do.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going through a whole bunch of remarks from President Joe Biden calling President Trump an illegitimate president, but I'll set those aside for now. I'd like to enter into the record, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter a written statement from Professor Turley from the United States House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Accountability from the 28th of September, 2023.
Without objection.
Thanks. I just think that this is so fitting just to read a brief portion of this, because it explains exactly what we're here to do today. And Professor Turley said, and I quote, "My testimony also reflects the fact that I do believe that after months of investigation, the House has passed the threshold for an inquiry into whether President Joe Biden was directly involved or benefited from the corrupt practices of his son, Hunter, and others. I believe the record has developed to the point that the House needs to answer troubling questions surrounding the president." He goes on to say, "The record currently contains witness and written evidence that the president, 1, has lied about key facts in these foreign dealings, 2, was the focus of a multi-million-dollar influence peddling scheme, and 3, may have benefited from his corruption through millions of dollars sent to his family, as well as more direct possible benefits. The president may be able to disprove or rebut these points, but they raise legitimate concerns over his role based on the accounts of key figures in the matter." So I would just like to point to the statement of Professor Turley, and thank you for putting in the record. I yield back.
Absolutely, thank you. Before we proceed with the resolution, let me make a few closing remarks. First, I want to thank everybody on the panel on both sides of the aisle. Clearly, this is a difficult subject to talk about. Clearly, there are sharp differences of opinion, but I was very pleased with the demeanor that everybody went about making their points is. I do want to refocus this. We've heard a great deal about President Trump. We've heard a great deal about President Biden. The purpose of the hearing is really simply about setting up a process. No one here should have a predetermined outcome in mind as to where they think we're going. You might have a predilection, but none of us know all the facts. And the reality is that is what we're seeking to do, is to empower committees to have the ability to fully investigate charges and come to independent conclusions and make a recommendation. At that point, whatever it is, if they decide to recommend anything at all, then the House will deal with it. So we covered a lot of ground, but some of it wasn't directly related to the process, and I think it's important to know that. The commitment I'll make to each of you on this committee is we'll continue to do our job in a fair and professional manner. You'll certainly continue to have your ability to make your points and your point of view known. I don't ever expect unanimity on the Rules Committee. It's not set up to achieve that. But again, I do want to conclude by reminding people there's a process that's underway. There's legitimate concerns and investigations. We're simply trying to give the investigators the tools they need to get to the truth, report back to the Congress, and then the Congress will be free to take whatever action, if any, it decides to take. So again, I thank all of you for your vigorous participation, but your professional demeanor and your civility and courtesy to one another. It genuinely is a privilege to serve in each and every one of you, with you, even when we don't agree. And And Mr. McGovern, like you, I wish you voted with me more often, too. So we can go from there. With that, do we have any further amendments? Okay, hearing no request for further amendments, the question's now on favorably reporting House Resolution 918 to the House. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
For roll call.
Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Burgess votes aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler. Aye. Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Aye. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey. Aye. Mr. Massey, aye. Mr. Norman. Aye. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Aye. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin. Aye. Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy. Aye. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon. No. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. No. Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Leisure Fernandez. No. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The ayes have it. The resolution is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the resolution. And this concludes today's business. The committee stands adjourned.